Hello, welcome to Orthodox Christian Television. My name is Father Christodoulos. This is Chios, the Island of Saints, Part 7. With me again is Dr. Milian Peter Illich, my friend, a historian and an author. Welcome, Dr. Illich.
Well, thank you very much.
We're picking up from where we left off, the history of Chios. We're entering the Genoese era, the era where the Genoese came in to administer Chios for the Roman Empire, which was ruled from its capital in Constantinople, the capital of the Roman Empire. The Genoese came to Chios in what year did they?
1346, and they established themselves in Chios until 1566.
Well over 2 centuries.
When the Turks took over.
Now the Genoese were asked by the Roman Empire to administer Chios because the Genoese themselves were a very good, strong maritime power.
Well, not only that, but they helped the Roman Empire in different wars, including against the Turks and against the other enemies of Constantinople. And this was part of their reward, that they were allowed to administer Chios. And they established actually a kind of a semi-independent state of Chios, which became really completely independent after 1453. Which means that
when Constantinople fell.
Right, for more than a century afterwards. They established a strange system under a kind of a corporate government, a corporate oligarchy called Maona, which was like an association of the greatest merchants of Chios, who together governed the entire island in the interest of the merchant class of Chios. In the beginning, all the people in Maona were basically Genoese, but gradually...
The Maona, is that a Greek or Italian word?
It's a strange word, which I'm not sure if it's either Greek or Italian or it's just a uniquely Chian word, but that's what it meant. It meant the association that governed Chios at that particular time.
No, it was made up of leading Chian merchants?
Merchants who governed Chios in the interest of the merchant class.
And clerics also?
No, originally no clerics, only merchants, strictly merchants. And,
bankers, businessmen?
Merchants, traders, bankers, and it became...
And Genoese, were there Genoese as a part of the Maona? There had to be, right?
Well, originally there were, all the leading members were Genoese. As time went on, gradually the Genoese, there were relatively few of them, and they mixed in with the native Greek population. And in fact, eventually they worked a strange system, which family would be Orthodox and Catholic. So in a number of cases for the noble families of Chios, who became the new aristocracy, like the Argenti family, they had their own chapels in which part of the chapel would be Catholic chapel, next to it would be Orthodox. So they could actually celebrate Catholic church ceremonies and Orthodox church ceremonies in the same chapel. Worked a strange system.
The Argentis, that sounds like a Genoese name.
It is. They're originally Argenti. They established themselves in Chios. They became one of the leading families, and some of their members are still very influential in cultural life.
The Argentis of Chios are now almost completely, they are completely Orthodox Greeks.
Right, for the most part, yes.
They've completely become Hellenized. Or Hellenized.
Well, it happened through the centuries. They actually became Hellenized and established themselves more and more in the interest of the Hellenic world. In fact, in 1453, Chios sent 4 ships while Constantinople was being besieged. They cut through a blockade of 300 Turkish ships. Achaean ships cut through 300 Turkish naval ships and went into Constantinople to give them reinforcements, 700 soldiers for Chios, so which substantial number were Greeks, and to bring food and supplies to help Constantinople during...
1453, May of 1453 was the final days of the Roman Empire.
That's
That
right.
was
And
the
before
fall of Rome. The fall
Right.
of Constantinople is actually the fall of Rome. 1453. Now, let's set the scene a little bit for the people watching. The city is surrounded on all sides. It's a city jutting out into the Sea of Marmara. It's jutting out into the Dardanelles, or into the ocean, if you will. The sea the city of Constantinople is surrounded by water on 3 sides, and the 4th side it has the land walls, the land side, where the Turkish army is gathered. And now you're saying there are 300 ships, and the bulk, the majority of the Turkish Navy has a blockade around the city.
Exactly.
And nothing can get in or out.
Well, that's what the Turks expected, and nothing can get in and out. But actually, 4 ships, of which 3 were manned by Chians, Greeks and Genoese, mostly Greeks. They cut through the Turkish Navy, and it was a...
How could 4 ships cut through a
Oh, it
Turkish
was an
Navy?
incredible
How is that possible?
battle. In fact, I have read in Turkish histories about it, in which they describe the original Turkish eyewitness account. The Sultan himself was on the seashore watching the Chian ships trying to cut through and ordering his navy to stop them. And he even rode his horse into the sea, screaming orders at his navy to go and stop those ships, don't let them through. And yet they fought their way through, and they came in to bring food and supplies and reinforcements. 700 soldiers as well came eventually too.
That was an incredible act of seamanship. Those 4 ships, the captains and the sailors,
and courage,
of those 4 ships,
because
and courage, and it must have given a great boost to the besieged Christians inside the capital.
Absolutely, had an incredible boost.
Were they watching from the ramparts of those?
Oh, they were, and we have eyewitness accounts of this from Turkish sources and from Christian sources, in which they describe in detail they couldn't believe that it was possible for the ships from Chios to do this, but they did.
Now they brought reinforcements to the besieged city. Now on
not
the ship,
really a lot of reinforcements.
700 men.
700. Well, there was there were almost 100,000 Turkish troops surrounding that entire area. So.
Well, 700 men is still 700. I mean, the walls were pretty thick, and if you have enough men to man the walls, you can put up a pretty good fight. But the leading soldier of Chios, or one of the leading families of Chios, were the Justiniani.
Justiniani. It was a Justiniani who led this little armada that came to help Constantinople.
He was on one of those ships.
He was one of those ships, and one of the Justiniani family, and another Justiniani was actually heavily. Actually, he was wounded in the battle and taken out.
Right, but before we get to that, the leader of the Genoese contingent that was defending Constantinople, the leading Genoese citizen, the officer of the Genoese in Constantinople, was of the Justiniani family.
Right.
Now he entered this. That's how he entered the city, on those 4 ships, or was he already
No, he
there?
was one of the Justiniani family had it was a large family, and there were quite a few of them. One of them was already there, and another Justiniani was the commander of this little flotilla.
Now the one that was killed defending the city, was he already in the city, or was he on one of those ships?
He was already in the city at that time. He was already there.
Describe what. Now we can consider him a Chian, even though his ancestry is Genoese.
For several centuries, and his ancestry was not pure Genoese. The family had already intermarried with the Greeks, so he had a heavy, a large Hellenic element in the ancestry.
So these were Chians by any description. They were Chians. I mean, if a family is in America for 300 years, if you have Americans living in America for the 300 years, marrying other Americans, they're nothing other than, even though they may have ancestry from Italy, they're now essentially Americans.
Essentially, yes.
Even though America's been here for more than 300 years, but the state.
Well, as a country, as a nation, it has not.
People who are descended from the Pilgrims will call themselves Americans, not English.
Right.
So the Justiniani were essentially Chians defending the capital of the Roman Empire, and they died defending the capital of the Roman Empire.
Several of them died over there, and but eventually Chios remained autonomous and held off the Turks for over a century later until 1566 when he was conquered by the Turks. Without really have to say, in 1566 it was an arrangement in which they allowed the Turks to come in return for payment of tribute. They allowed the Turks to take over Chios. It was not
It was not a conquest.
It was not a conquest. It was more like an occupation by permission. And
Sort of the way the British took over Cyprus.
And it was by treaty, and the treaty allowed he has considerable degree of autonomy, and for several centuries under the Turks it was very prosperous, and Chian merchants spread throughout the Turkish Empire and outside, and next to Constantinople and Smyrna, Chios was considered the third wealthiest center of the Turkish Empire. The city of Chios was the third wealthiest city in the Turkish Empire for several centuries.
The first being Constantinople.
Because second Smyrna, third Chios.
All Roman, all Greek.
Right.
Now, the Turks, when they were allowed to occupy Chios by the Genoese, did the leading Genoese families remain in Chios, or did they flee, or did they leave?
Many of them actually left, but some did remain in Chios.
Some of them went where? To Genoa?
Back to Genoa.
Places where they'd never been in their life.
Oh, that's right. Some of them just did not want to stay there under the Turks and did go back to Italy. And as we know, there were quite a few connections between Chios and Genoa for centuries, including the fact that Christopher Columbus came to Chios, and he was a Genoese, and he went to Chios, and it is believed by some that over there he was able to get some maps, ancient maps which showed the possibility of routes to India by going westward across the Atlantic.
Well, the Chians knew the world was round.
Right.
Being great sailors, as the 4 ships that broke through the Turkish Armada proved. And by the way, as an aside, the Chians still have a reputation for being good sailors, and they're among the largest contingent of merchant marine. One of the largest private fleets in the world is the Greek-owned merchant ships in the world's fleets. And the largest single group of Greeks on those ships are Chians. So to this day, they're sailors. So it makes sense that Columbus would have gone and found navigational aid in Chios for his journeys to what he thought was going to be India eventually.
Right.
So he spent boyhood summers in Chios?
He actually spent quite a bit of time in Chios, and in fact there are several books that have come out claiming that he might have even been born in Chios, which is not confirmed by historical scholarship, but
we know he spent time there.
Right, and we know that he knew Greek, and there are some signature in which he signs his name in Greek letters instead of Latin letters. Mm-hmm. So, there's a strong connection between him and Chios.
It's also interesting, doesn't he mention Chios in his logs when he comes to America?
Right, because he compares trees that he saw in America, which are the same family as mastic trees in Chios, to the mastic trees in Chios.
So he thought maybe some of the riches that he would find in America for the Spanish crown, some of those riches might be mastic, the Chian-type mastic.
Right.
Not gold, not silver, but maybe there's mastic.
Well, mastic was like gold and more important than silver, and that was one of the reasons that the Turks allowed Chios to have certain autonomy, to have a certain degree of freedom for several centuries, because the mastic trees of southern Chios, especially the 24 or so villages in the Mastikora area of Chios, were an incredible source of wealth for the Turkish Empire. And this whole area, the mastic section was given to the Sultana, either
Sultana being what?
Being either the favorite wife or the mother or the sister of the Sultan.
The favorite wife. So the Turks were true Muslims. They did not. They were polygamists.
Well, polygamists to a very large degree until this century, really.
And they brought this polygamy to Chios. by having, well,
Well,
indirectly by
but the
allowing,
Sultana didn't live in Chios, but
she didn't live in Chios.
she didn't live in Chios, but the entire area, the mastic tree area, was given to the Sultana as a reward for being the favorite of the Sultan, or
Like a
whichever.
gift. It was like a
Like a
gift.
gift, and this became tradition of Chios for centuries that this would belong to the Sultana, whoever had the title of the Sultana, which is essentially like the queen. And it could be the queen mother, or it could be the dowager queen, or it could be a sister.
So the great wealth of Chios also was the source of Chios's relative freedom
Right.
compared to the rest of the Greek-speaking world that was under the Turkish yoke. Because, why? Because Chios was wealthy. Why was it given? Why couldn't the Turks oppress the Chians as much as they were oppressing the rest of the Greek-speaking world? Just because they had mastic or wealth?
Well, it was. They could, and eventually we'll show what they did to Chios. But for a long time, it was convenient for them to allow Chios to do things its own way, because Turks really didn't know how to handle the mastic trees, how to grow them, how to take care of them. This involves special knowledge and skills and technique, which had been learned through generations and generations of Chians. And Turks really couldn't understand how to do it. And in addition, the naval merchant trade of Chios was very useful to the Turks in their desire to get Western goods. They really, they wanted European goods, manufacturers of Germany, Italy, and so on, and they were not sailors, but the Chians were. So the Chians could be intermediary in the merchant trade between Turkey and Western Europe for centuries, which became their specialty, in being middlemen. And it was useful for the Turks to have middlemen. I mean, a Turkish Aga or Pasha couldn't handle himself in Paris or London, but a Chian could. And this...
They were sophisticated Europeans, the Chians.
They were Europeans, and
let's be realistic about it. They were the founders of European civilization.
Well, one of them anyway.
We discussed this in previous programs. They invented democracy. They invented everything that the classical Greeks invented. Were practically originated by Chians or in Chios. A lot of it. The Chians were, let's put it this way, the Chians were Europeans long before the Germans, the British, and the French.
Well, that's for sure, and before anybody heard of the Germans, in fact.
Before the Germans heard
and
of
of course
themselves.
before the Turks, as we know, the Turks are the ancestors of the Ottoman Turks, who were the founders of today's Turkey, only came to Asia Minor approximately in the year 1250 AD. So the Turks are really the last of the invading people in Europe. They were the last invaders of Europe, the last barbarian invaders of Europe, which they originally were barbarians. I mean, I wouldn't say they're barbarians now, but they were the last barbarian group to come into Europe.
Now, getting back to the occupation of Chios by the Turks, they were there now for a couple of centuries. We can rightfully say that the Chians prospered under the Turkish yoke. Can we say that?
We can say that the Chians did. They did prosper under the Turks for several centuries.
They did very, very well. I mean, very well.
Actually, for over 2 centuries, until we come to the area. Well, until we come to the time of the Greek Revolution.
What happened there? What happened? Why? If I was a Chian, well, you tell us. I'm not going to take a. You're the historian. Why did what went wrong with Chios and its involvement in the Greek Revolution?
Well, what happened is, as you know, the Greek Revolution started in 1821, and it was a result of terrible oppression in the area, the mainland, mainly in the mainland of Greece, incredible oppression of torture and so on by the Greeks for a long time, oppression of the Greeks, especially by the Turks and their army. There were, like, in the late 18th century, there were massacres of Greeks by Albanians going on for many years, who were soldiers in the Turkish army. Albanians were the most loyal soldiers in the Turkish army in this period. And
The Albanians at that time had become Mohammedans,
right,
Muslims.
almost about 80%, about 80% Muslims. So eventually in 1821 there was a revolution in Greece, and the unrest was so great in Greece that some of the Greeks, in fighting against the Turks, did actually kill Turkish civilians as well to a certain degree, and we can't condone it, but it did happen.
Well, NATO would call that collateral damage.
It would call collateral damage, would excuse it if it was for a good cause.
But there's never any good reason to kill civilians.
So the Turks were getting annoyed at that, as you can imagine. In fact, they were very angry. And meanwhile, Chios stayed on the sideline. But in
Chios, while their compatriots, their fellow Christians, who were being oppressed in parts of the Ottoman Turkish Empire, were fighting for their freedom, the Chians stayed to the side. They didn't join in the fight.
They gave material help from Chios to the cause. In fact, Chios was actually considered, who was a Chian.
Korais in Greek.
In Greek, he was considered like the intellectual inspirer of the Greek Revolution, of Hellenic, new nationalism, Greek nationalism. So they were important in this, but they didn't want to rebel because they felt that they would be totally helpless against the still very powerful Turkish army.
The Chian population, how was it as far as militarized in comparison to the other Greek-speaking peoples of the Ottoman Empire?
It was not very militaristic at all. It was a prosperous merchant community. There were schools, there were hospitals. It was intellectual. It was really a peaceful community, which for the most part did not want to revolt. But in 1821, a certain Lycurgus Logothetis,
right,
who was from Samos, managed to
Samos being where?
the island of Samos,
nearby Chios.
Near Chios, managed to get the permission of Demetrius Ypsilantis, who was considered the lieutenant governor of Greece. He was considered the main leader of the Greek Revolution at this particular time, for a revolt in Chios, to inspire a revolt in Chios. He planned to land in Chios with an army of soldiers from Samos to liberate Chios from the Turks and to inspire a revolution in Chios. So he started planning this in late 1821, but however, he did not know, and the Greeks didn't know until this century. And in fact, as far as I know, this was not told in any history of the Greek Revolution, that the British had been told about it. The British knew that the Greeks were coming to raise a revolt in Chios, and in December of 1821, as soon as they heard, they ran to tell the Turkish government that the Greeks were coming to Chios to raise revolt in Chios.
In other words, the British betrayed their fellow Christians.
Not only did they betray them in telling the Turks that they were coming to raise revolt in Chios, but they urged the Turks to arm themselves, and they were very disturbed that the Turks didn't sufficiently arm their garrison in Chios to stop the Greeks from even landing in Chios. And we actually have the British diplomatic correspondence, as you can see this, which has come to light in this century, and which shows how the British ambassador in Constantinople, Viscount Strangford, reported
Viscount Strangford?
Reported to the British Foreign Secretary, the Marquis of Londonderry, how the British and the French, to a certain extent as well, have repeatedly told the Turkish government that the Greeks were coming to raise revolt in Chios.
Now, can we make sense out of this? It sounds like a complete betrayal. I mean, France is supposedly Christian, Britain is supposedly Christian, and Chios and all of Greece are Christians fighting for their freedom against Islam, and Islam has always been threatening to conquer, France and Britain and the rest of Europe. how could we explain this betrayal? What makes sense out of it? Is it possible that because England and France in that time were still monarchies, and the Ottoman Empire were monarchies, and there's a revolt against a monarchy, and it's one monarch being loyal to another monarch? I mean, is that enough to explain it?
No, that's not enough to explain it. There are several explanations. One, first of all, I have to say that the British do not look at this as betrayal. I mean, in the diplomatic correspondence, they think that they're being very humanitarian in doing this. They think that if they can avoid fighting Chios by the fact that if the Turkish army can be strong enough to stop the Greeks from liberating Chios, then there'll be peace in Chios. Now, peace in Chios was very important for them because the British merchants were very closely connected with the Chian merchant class. So they would lose money if the trade of Chios was disrupted. They would lose a lot of money, and they didn't want to lose that money.
Well, couldn't they have taken Chios, helped liberate it, and we'll find out in the next program. We have 1 minute left. I'm going to ask a question. We'll end the program with a question, and you can answer it in the next program. And we're going to get to the massacre of Chios by the Turks, what essentially ended Chian civilization as anyone knew it up until that time. The question is, couldn't the British and the French and the Western powers...
It was ethnic cleansing par excellence.
It was the first Holocaust of the 19th... Well, not the first, it wasn't the 20th. It was a Holocaust and a genocide.
Well, you could say that was the first Holocaust of the 19th century. You can really say that because...
Okay. The question I want to end on is, couldn't the British and the French have helped the Greeks and Chios in the revolution against the Turks and thereby set up merchant alliances and set up businesses connections with these freed Greeks? Why didn't they have the foresight to see something like that? That's the question you'll answer in the next program. You can't answer it now. We have 30 seconds left. Thank you for watching Orthodox Christian Television. My name is Father Christodoulos. Thank you, Dr. Illich, for being here again.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching.